Welcome to BA4Space. I bring you all the business data and financial analysis concerning our favorite subject, commercial space. Let's kick things off with the space startup roundup, and I'm going to talk about emerging new space companies. These are the startups that either promote or directly contribute to the burgeoning capitalization of suborbital, orbital, and outer space industries, and each week I take one of them and break the company down into an analysis, starting with a company profile. I will then run a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then I run a gap analysis to determine where their aspirations may run short due to the gap between what they have and what they need to succeed. And for the last part of the company breakdown, I make my own recommendations for the space startup, I make predictions, and then I wish them the best of luck in their endeavors. And this week's space startup company roundup includes Aviosonic Space Tech, solving the orbital debris problem; Orbital Assembly, forming the first turnkey space construction company; and Galactic Suite, designing, manufacturing, and operating rovers. And let's start with Aviosonic. Aviosonic Space Tech is an Italian company, and according to their website, they have the solution to the space debris problem. No, they don't. They have a space debris mitigation solution, but does not solve the growing problem. And so let's talk about that for a second. The current talking points surrounding orbital space debris is that all the junk that's discarded from launch vehicles and derelict satellites is just swimming around low Earth orbit. Eventually, the orbit of the debris will degrade and burn up in the atmosphere, but it takes time. The reason why garbage doesn't accumulate on my front lawn is because I pay someone to take it somewhere else. So who's that customer? Who needs space debris off their lawn? The key to this business model may not have as much to do with get it off my lawn as please keep this speeding bullet from destroying my $100 million satellite or space station. Aviosonic's solution is to affix a device on a launch vehicle and their payloads so that everyone knows exactly where the device is, but more importantly, in the event of fragmentation of the craft during re-entry, will send an emergency alert to concerned parties, letting them know that pieces of the craft may be coming down into the atmosphere, and gives a better approximate time of re-entry and position. Orbital space cleanup as a solution is all the rage in new space. The problem is turning it into a viable business. Collecting garbage without a customer doesn't translate into a profitable business. Repurposing that garbage in orbit does. However, Aviosonic may have developed a cheap and versatile alert system that solves several key space debris related problems. I wish them luck and hope to see more space debris mitigation products from this team. On to the next startup. Orbital Assembly. According to the website, they are forming the first turnkey space construction company. If this sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, that's because it looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. I know it's a rendering, but if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a good render is worth 1,000,000. Orbital Assembly bills themselves as a project management team. That is, they will manage the acquisition and planning of in-orbit assembly activities, but will not fabricate the components themselves. What we see in the rendering on Orbital Assembly's website is actually the brainchild of the Gateway Foundation's Gateway Segment Assembly Line and Trussolators from Tethers Unlimited. The rendering is compelling, and I highly recommend watching the full sequence. I've included the link to the YouTube video below. But more importantly, it illustrates Orbital Assembly's mission statement of accessing resources and vendors' specialities to fulfill a greater in-orbit project. The team making up Orbital Assembly reminds me more of a consulting firm, but has elements of project manager constructors organizations as well. Their approach is straightforward. They design and plan and outsource the specific tasks of the work breakdown structure. It's a solid model and doesn't require Orbital Assembly to do any of the heavy lifting. If there's to be any progress in the near future in terms of cislunar and orbital permanent architecture, these gentlemen will be leading the way. So on to the next startup, Galactic Suite Surface Operations. Before I move on to Galactic Suite, let's talk about the concept of an elevator pitch real quick. The idea behind the term is that you should be able to describe in a concise and clear way your idea or product. The duration of this pitch should be as long as it takes for your average elevator ride. Galactic Suite's one-line synopsis, as stated at the top, is designing, manufacturing, and operating rovers. Their mission statement consists of words such as low cost, easy, quick, cheap, and the body of their mission statement also references words like standardization, reutilization. After tirelessly combing through news articles about the company and reading and rereading their website, I realized that they don't have an elevator pitch. I had to condense what they want to consist of general ideals like lowering the cost of space, products built to order, and collaboration between verticals. This doesn't tell me much about the focus of the company. I have to glean their purpose through inference, but I don't expect you to do the same. It sounds like Galactic Suite wants to do everything in space, and with that, let's move on. So that's it for this week's Space Company Startup Roundup, and time to see who will be profiled on this week's BA4Space analysis. And this week, we profile Orbital Assembly. The first time I heard of this company was in reference to the Gateway Foundation's Gateway Segment Assembly Line and Trussulator from Tethers Unlimited. Oscar Isaac, one of the featured YouTubers featured below, mentioned them on a piece he did on in-orbit space station concepts and the future of space habitats. As I said before, I was mesmerized and just watched the Orbital Assembly concept video over and over again. Why did this capture my attention? Because it looked real, it looked viable, it looked like something that was already happening. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get to the SWOT. First, the strengths. Since the focus of the SWOT analysis is on Orbital Assembly themselves and not the Gateway Foundation, the first obvious strength is that they can focus on the companies that have proven themselves through demonstration, RFIs, and precedent. For instance, Orbital Assembly does not need to demonstrate launch-ready materials and fabrication. They need to demonstrate project management, viability, and analysis. They don't need to demonstrate in-situ resource utilization. They need to demonstrate vendor negotiations and SOWs with those who have. Orbital Assembly's strengths do not lie in the actions of grander goals they want to achieve, but in the portfolio of those that are key players within the startup. For instance, the organization's president and principal engineer has an established history in aerospace, startups, and fabrication. If this show is any indication, good ideas are not hard to find, but organizations equipped with resources and know-how to facilitate the ideas are. The key strength here is the expertise in bringing all of the pieces of a good plan together in a trademarked way. That is, hopefully, the keystone to Orbital Assembly's future success. So what are the weaknesses? I used to work for a management consulting firm, and one of their biggest strengths was the methodologies they employed in the execution of their management consulting activities. That was the product the firm sold. However, one of their biggest weaknesses was the management within their own firm. That's really no surprise that it's borderline cliche to observe that mechanics cars are always breaking down, software development companies use the cheapest and most unstable tools internally, and lawyers are always getting arrested. But from what I can tell, Orbital Assembly has no particular product they're selling. We want to know what they do, and that's not hard to see. But if you're in a sales pitch meeting with a customer and you're selling them on why you can build their space hotel, their fabrication assembly unit, their lunar relay station, or a refueling depot, what is the actual product you are selling them? Without a product or methodology to pitch, you are telling them just to trust you. Yes, project management is project management, but what puts customers over the finish line in terms of closing the deal is to make a compelling demonstration of just how you are going to achieve your goals. It's an interview. And if you walked into an interview with "trust me" written on your business card and nothing else, no one is going to hire you. All right, so what are the opportunities? The opportunities for orbital construction and project management contracts depend wholly on the product demand. So let's take a look at that for a second. Demand for orbital services range from satellite deployment and maintenance to entertainment and layovers to other destinations. For instance, a very common need is to refuel deep space probes. The interplanetary transport system proposed by Elon Musk at the 68th International Astronautical Congress in Adelaide in 2017 proposed that in an effort to fulfill Mars transport mission requirements, the passenger BFR and a refueling tanker would both need to be launched from Earth. What if we didn't need that second launch? Another example is the International Space Station. That was painstakingly constructed over the course of years and required hundreds of hours of EVAs and exposure to piece the modules together. It's arguable that these activities are being proposed simply because there's no existing orbital infrastructure in place with in situ fabrication. Another angle for opportunities is to look at what industries are interested in space. Most of the time we assume humanity wants to exploit space for the purposes of idealistic crusades, exploration, the betterment of mankind, and the proliferation of our species through our solar system. What if it just came down to money? An industry that's been gaining conceptual traction over the years is space mining. If the numbers work out, it could be more cost-effective to track down and mine a near-Earth asteroid for the rare minerals we need in a number of existing industries here on Earth. Refueling activities serve a large number of spacecraft and satellites that also serve a wide range of existing industries such as communications, education, entertainment, and government. In summary, for every one industry that would directly benefit from orbital construction activities, there are 3 or 4 industries that support it. Instead of focusing on just a space hotel, Orbital Assembly should focus on 3 or 4 industries that are supporting that endeavor. In an N to the X scenario where N is the project and X equals the vendors of the projects, the opportunities reside in the X, not the N. So what are the threats? When we talk about threats within the context of a SWOT analysis, we refer to external threats. External threats deal with competition or environmental factors such as the economy or political environment. So, what are the threats with respect to orbital assembly? Those blasted companies and organizations that think they can do it all themselves. That's who. I've run into this a lot. There's a certain pride within a company that claims that they can solve all their production problems in-house. My boy Elon Musk is also guilty of this. Sure, there's an appeal to not having to deal with vendors or RFIs, but let me assure you, the people who live, eat, and breathe that one thing are the people you want doing the job. So let's go back to Apollo 11 mission for a second. The whole mission contained in one unit sounds elegant, sounds contained, and sounds extremely expensive. What if you had certain specialists handling the landers, the launch, the rovers, mission control? Each unit is specialized and has done it for years, with one project manager making sure all of the boxes were checked, benchmarks being met, and budgets being adhered to. Less waste, less expense, quicker turnaround time. The threat in this particular scenario is not bowing to the competitive advantage. So, from there, we hit the gap. The purpose of a gap analysis is to identify where we are and contrast that to where we want to be. We illustrate current state, future state, describe the gap between the two, and talk about ways to bridge the gap. So what's the current state? The current state is conceptual only. But how far is orbital assembly from current state to future state? That may depend on their resources. For instance, they have some heavy hitters on their team like Dr. Thomas R. Spilkner, a PhD who has time on Voyager, Cassini, and the Rosetta mission with NASA and ESA. They also feature Kit Carson, a mechanical engineer hailing from NASA, Boeing, United Technologies, and Goodrich. They have a talented, diverse, and experienced team, and if they are on board, I'm on board. While the current state may sound conceptual, this team has serious time in the industry with a forward-thinking passion to convert concept to application. So what's the future state? The future state is beyond imagination, so let's try to keep this reasonable. What does a future 20 years from now within the context of orbital assembly look like? The interesting thing about what orbital assembly wants to do is that it focuses on the basics of big industry: energy, logistics, transportation, and mining. Everything they want to do drives the framework of economic expansion and holds a typical GDP's biggest indicators. This shines a favorable light on long-term investment strategies. The cherry on the top is that the services rendered provide goods and services to not only low Earth orbit and geostationary spaces, but those of us on the ground as well. There are immediate needs for orbital assembly services and infrastructure. and there are viable long-term corporate financial strategies as well. So, what's the gap between the two? As I've mentioned in previous episodes, the gap between the current and future state regarding a concept like this is where the raw stock comes from. In situ resource utilization. Yeah. Is it just that? Or does the industry not have customers yet? It's very easy for me to sit here and just say, well, if you just had A, you could get B, and we can't get C until you have developed B. Let's do a simple work breakdown structure to assess project needs in an endeavor such as this. If we start high level with materials fabrication, energy requirements, robotics, and human resources, we see pretty quickly where the gap will present itself. While there is a precedent for ground supply and transportation of materials, there is no precedent of lunar raw stock extraction. Furthermore, while we have a lot of experience of in situ robotics operations, there is limited autonomy with these robotics, which is the element I imagine Orbital Assembly will depend on heavily. Well, so what's the bridge? The bridge to Orbital Assembly's specific gap isn't so much about ability. As demonstrated, Orbital Assembly's human resources have already undertaken almost all of the major categories on the work breakdown structure. The bridge has more to do with economies of scale. Large government space projects are remarkably specific in mission and spacecraft design. In most cases, the same design will not be used again. The bridge for Orbital Assembly must focus on commercial, off-the-shelf, and volume. While space has certain specifics, the tools and fabrications required for operations must be applicable to any number of tangent activities and verticals. Furthermore, if Orbital Assembly develops any competitive advantages in operations, materials fabrication, and integrations, they are best to share with the industry to enable standardizations and efficiencies. I'm not saying give away the cow, but there is no point to holding that particular secret precious. As I stated earlier, you need to work with specialists across markets, not do everything yourself. All right, conclusions and recommendations. Orbital Assembly, the Gateway Foundation, and Tethers Unlimited have something special in their intellectual capital. These are the most viable concepts that I've run across in quite some time, not to mention an absolute pleasure to watch. A good idea is surprisingly rare. Anyone has a good idea, but no one has a good idea. I like how Orbital Assembly is not relying on just their good ideas, but share the good ideas in supporting concepts and industries. If they keep that up, they are sure to make real and tangible progress. And as a parting anecdote, I often go into a requirement session not knowing a lick about the process, and in some cases am simply regurgitating buzzwords fed to me. Yet, I'm still able to get the job done and structure a project in a meaningful way. Project management is nothing without industry experts and those who have played the game for decades. Yet expertise yields nothing without tried and true methodologies. Space exploration is only possible with an established infrastructure. That infrastructure is to be bought and sold on the open and free market. And while that may sound cynical, it's not. It's just business. And I'll see you all next time.